Elena was 32 years old, and until that quiet Thursday morning, she believed that signing her name one final time would be the bravest thing she had ever done. She sat across from her husband at the glass desk in the study where he had signed multi-million-dollar deals without blinking, the same room where she had once watched armed men kneel before him like he was something between a king and a god. Marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows swallowing a city skyline whole, art on the walls that cost more than most people's lifetimes. She was dressed simply. Dark silk blouse, hair pulled back, posture perfectly composed. The way 3 years of being Kang Min-jae's wife had trained her to sit even when she was breaking. Her hands did not shake when she uncapped the pen. She had decided that much. He stood on the opposite side of the desk, tall, still, dressed in a black tailored suit that fit him like armor, like it had been designed specifically to make him unreadable. Tattoos climbed the sides of his neck and disappeared beneath a collar that was never fully buttoned. His jaw was set. His expression was the same expression he wore in every room, controlled, cold, and devastatingly composed. He wore black gloves, as he always did, and beneath the left one, she knew, was the wedding ring he had never once removed in 3 years. He read the papers. He set them down. He looked at her, directly, unhurriedly, the way he looked at everything he was calculating. "I won't sign." 3 words. No emotion, no explanation. Just that voice, low and final, like a verdict. Elena felt something snap clean inside her chest. 3 years. 3 years of watching him choose war rooms over dinner tables. 3 years of sleeping beside someone who protected her like a possession and loved her like a classified document, present, necessary, and completely sealed from her reach. She had asked him once about children. He had looked at her the way he looked at poorly timed proposals, not unkindly, just without real consideration. "Not yet," he had said, and "not yet" had stretched into silence, into distance, into the slow, suffocating realization that she was elegant furniture inside a life that did not actually need her warmth. She wanted pillow fights. She wanted laughter that didn't feel like a security risk. She wanted a man who would look at her across a dinner table and feel something he could not control. Min-jae felt everything. He controlled all of it. She picked up the pen and signed anyway. She stood. She did not look back at him. She walked out of that room, out of that penthouse, out of that empire, and every step felt like oxygen returning to a body that had nearly forgotten how to breathe. She told herself she had finally escaped a cold, controlling monster. She was wrong. She just did not know it yet. Freedom lasted 6 days. On the 7th morning, her primary bank account was frozen without notice. On the 9th day, her flight to Madrid was canceled at the gate. No explanation, no rebooking, no record that the ticket had ever existed. By the 12th day, she noticed the same dark car parked outside her apartment building 3 mornings in a row. Different plates, same silhouette behind the wheel. And Adrian Keller, the man who had spent months making her feel seen, chosen, and emotionally alive, stopped answering every phone, every message, every number. Gone. Completely and cleanly gone, as though he had never existed at all. Then came the night everything collapsed. Armed men, her door, fast and rehearsed and completely silent until they weren't. Before they reached her, gunfire, precise, brutal, professional. Elena lost consciousness on the floor of her own hallway. She woke up in a room that felt like a memory she had tried to bury. She screamed before she was fully awake. "I can't be here again. I just want to leave this cage." A figure stood in the shadows near the window, still. Familiar, dressed in black. Kang Min-jae turned slowly. His face was unreadable. His voice was quiet. "You made that decision," he said, "and I can't just let you go." Before we see what really happened between Elena and her husband, Min-jae, drop in the comments if you've ever mistaken someone's silence for not caring. And tell me this, do you think protection without words is still love? I love hearing from readers who feel stories in their chest, not just their eyes. Every comment helps this story reach someone who may need it tonight. So take a breath, get comfortable, and let the city lights blur around you. Let's begin. The penthouse breathed differently at night. Elena had noticed it early in the marriage. The way the silence inside Min-jae's estate had a texture to it, something dense and architectural, like the walls themselves had been built to absorb sound rather than carry it. 43rd floor, marble everywhere, floor-to-ceiling glass that turned the city below into something beautiful and completely unreachable. Hired staff who moved through rooms like ghosts, appearing only when needed, vanishing the moment their function was complete. It was the most expensive silence Elena had ever lived inside. She stood at the window that night in a cream silk robe, bare feet on cold marble, watching the city pulse below her like a second heartbeat. Somewhere behind her, the bedroom was immaculate. The bed was turned down on both sides, by staff who still believed in the performance of a shared life. Minjai's side was empty. It usually was by this hour. He would come in late, move through the dark without waking her, or without trying to. And by morning, he would already be seated at the long dining table with encrypted documents and black coffee, dressed like he had somewhere important to be before the world had fully decided to begin. 3 years. She turned that number over in her mind the way you turned a stone in your palm, feeling the weight of it, the smoothness worn down by repetition. 3 years of gowns selected by stylists. 3 years of galas where she stood at his side in rooms full of people who feared him and smiled at her with careful, measured warmth. 3 years of a marriage that looked, from the outside, like the most powerful love story in any room it entered. She had asked him about children 8 months ago, not dramatically. She hadn't staged it or chosen a soft moment. She had simply asked, one evening at dinner, whether he had thought about it, whether they were moving toward something. He had looked up from the document he was reading. A brief pause, then, "Not the right time, Elena." She nodded. She had gone back to her food. She had not asked again. But she had begun, quietly and without announcing it to herself, to count the ways she had disappeared inside his life. She was present at every public event. She was absent from every real conversation. She was dressed perfectly and consulted about nothing. She was protected from everything and included in less. She had once, early in the first year, tried to start a pillow fight. She remembered it now and almost laughed, except the memory had edges. She had thrown a pillow at him from across the bed on a Sunday morning, laughing, trying to find the version of him that existed somewhere beneath all that control. He had caught it, set it aside, looked at her with an expression that was not cold exactly, but was calibrated in a way that made warmth feel like a miscalculation. He had said nothing. He had returned to whatever he was reading. She had never tried again. She wondered sometimes, standing exactly like this, at exactly this window, watching exactly this city, why he had married her at all, what she served in the architecture of his life beyond presence, beyond appearance. She was not naive enough to believe it had been random. Minjai did nothing without calculation. But calculation and love were not the same country, and she had begun to suspect she had been living in one while hoping for the other. The distance grew the way distances always grow between people who don't name them, slowly, then completely. The first time Elena heard gunfire inside the compound walls, she dropped the book she was reading and pressed herself against the interior wall of the library, heart slamming against her ribs like it was trying to exit her body entirely. Security had caught a man at the eastern perimeter. She was told this afterward, briefly, by one of Minjai's men, Han Sumin, his strategist, who delivered information the way a doctor delivered diagnoses. Accurate, efficient, and stripped of anything that might require you to feel it. Situation is handled, Mrs. Kang. Please remain inside until we confirm the perimeter is clear. She remained inside. She was always remaining inside. The attempts were escalating. She understood this, not because Minjai told her anything. He did not. But because she had learned to read the compound the way you learned to read weather. More men on the outer walls meant something had shifted. Encrypted calls that ran past midnight meant the shift was serious. The look on Suman's face, usually carefully neutral, tightening almost imperceptibly. That meant it was worse than serious. She began sleeping poorly. She would wake at 2, 3 in the morning, reach across the bed, and find it either empty or occupied by a man who slept with the stillness of someone who had taught his body not to betray him, even unconsciously. She stopped reaching across. She began to feel something she had not expected. Not just loneliness, but a specific, sharpening fear that had nothing to do with the assassins outside the walls. It was the fear of being emotionally erased, of spending years inside a life so large and so loud and so dangerous that by the time it was over, she would not be able to find herself inside it anywhere. She was scrolling through her phone one afternoon, not looking for anything, just moving through the bright, frictionless surface of it the way you did, when the real world felt too textured to touch, when an advertisement appeared between reels. A private art charity gala. Curated collection. Intimate attendance. Black tie. 2 nights from now at a venue 40 minutes from the compound. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she requested the car. The gala was everything the penthouse was not. Warm light. Conversation that wasn't encrypted. People who looked at each other when they spoke, rather than calculating the exit routes first. Elena moved through the room in a gown the color of deep wine, her dark hair pinned at the base of her neck, and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized had been clenched. She was looking at a large canvas near the far wall. Abstract, all violent color and controlled form. Something about it that reminded her of the compound in a way she couldn't fully articulate. When she became aware of being watched, she looked up. Across the room, a man was already looking at her. Tall, European features, late 30s, dressed in a dark evening suit, with the easy confidence of someone who had never needed armor because rooms had always simply arranged themselves around him. He had dark blonde hair and an open expression, not the calculated openness she had learned to identify in Minjai's world, but something that appeared genuinely warm, genuinely present. He noticed her noticing him, noticing her, and instead of looking away, he moved toward her. "You've been staring at that piece for almost 10 minutes, he said. His voice was unhurried, slightly amused. "Either you love it deeply or you're trying to decide whether you hate it." Elena almost said something formal, something wife of Kang Minjai composed. Instead, she said, "I think it frightens me. I'm trying to understand why." He looked at the canvas, then back at her. "That's the most interesting thing anyone said in this room tonight." He extended his hand. "Adrian Keller." "Elena," she said. And, for the first time in longer than she could precisely recall, she did not add her husband's name after it. They talked for 2 hours. About the painting, then about art as language, then about cities and the different ways people disappeared inside them, then about nothing important and everything real. He listened with the whole of his attention. Not performing attention. Not the polite, surface-level engagement she received at official functions, but the kind of listening that made you feel like the most specific version of yourself, rather than a representative one. By the time the gala began to empty, Elena was already comparing. She hated herself for it slightly. She did it anyway. Adrian texted her first. She hadn't given him her number. She realized this only after she stared at the message for a long moment, sitting in the back of the car on the way back to the compound. She decided not to examine how he had found it. They began meeting in small, unimportant places. A cafe near a gallery district where no one who knew Minjai's world had any reason to be. A quiet restaurant in a neighborhood that was not on any route his drivers typically used. Once, for almost an hour, in a parked car near a waterfront, talking until the windows fogged from the warmth of just conversation. It was in one of those parked cars that Elena finally said it out loud. "What do you say about a man," she began, looking straight ahead through the fogged glass, "who has everything? Power, money, people who would die for him, and still fights, still reaches for more control, even over his wife?" Adrian was quiet for a moment, then, "I'd say he's a man who's learned to possess things instead of love them. Because possession is something you can manage. Love isn't." It was a clean answer. Too clean, perhaps, if she had been paying a different kind of attention. But she wasn't. She was paying the kind of attention that comes after years of emotional starvation. Hungry, immediate, and grateful for anything that resembled nourishment. He never said anything directly cruel about Minjai. He was more precise than that. He asked questions instead. Does he ask about your day? Does he know what frightens you that isn't related to his world? Has he ever chosen you? Just you, not the empire, not the strategy. Chosen just you. The answers formed themselves without her having to speak them. And slowly, then completely, the word divorce stopped feeling like a threat and began feeling like a door. She bought the first burner phone on a Tuesday. She felt ridiculous buying it. She stood in a small electronics shop, 3 neighborhoods from the compound, in a coat she rarely wore, and paid in cash the way she had seen it done in films that she had always assumed were exaggerating. She was not, she told herself, a woman having an affair. She was a woman protecting her privacy. She was a woman reclaiming a self that had been slowly swallowed. She believed this for approximately 2 weeks. By the third week, she had stopped arguing with herself about what it was. The meetings became more deliberate. There were places Adrian had arranged. A private apartment in a building that required a code she had memorized, a small house outside the city that he referred to simply as somewhere quiet. She told the compound she was at charity functions, gallery viewings, lunch with women whose names she had offered to Minji's security team as cover, without fully registering that this was what she was doing. She felt alive. That was the truth of it, the one she kept coming back to when her conscience pressed against her. She felt lit from within in a way that the penthouse, for all its curated beauty, for all its cold, expensive perfection, had never managed to produce. Adrian laughed easily. He held her face when he looked at her like she was worth the full attention of being looked at. He asked about her childhood, her mother, the small ordinary things that Min-jae had never once inquired about in 3 years. She told herself Min-jae would never know. She was wrong about this in the most complete possible way, because in the compound's lower level, in a room she had never been permitted to enter and had stopped wondering about, Kang Min-jae sat in front of a wall of surveillance screens. Sumin stood to his left. The feeds were clear and time-stamped and comprehensive. Min-jae watched the footage of the cafe, the waterfront, the building with the code. His expression did not change. He did not reach for his phone. He did not stand. He did not give a single visible indication that what he was watching was anything more than data. He folded his hands on the desk with the thoughts of where this would end. And he began to study the strange man Adrian Keller with the same cold, patient, surgical attention he gave to every threat that entered his world. Not with rage. Not with jealousy. The footage never lied. Min-jae had learned this the way he had learned most things that mattered, through years of watching people believe they were invisible, while the cameras, above them, recorded every breath. He had built his intelligence network the way other men built cathedrals. Patiently, expensively, and with the understanding that what you were constructing would outlast the version of yourself that began it. The room in the compound's lower level had no windows. It didn't need them. The screens gave him the world in fragments, time-stamped, cross-referenced, impossible to argue with. He watched Elena enter the building with the code on a Wednesday evening. He watched her leave 2 hours later. He watched Adrian Keller stand at the window of the same building for several minutes after she had gone. And he watched the precise moment Keller reached for his own phone and made a call that Min-jae's team was already in the process of intercepting. He did not move from his chair. Sumin stood beside him with the expression of a man who had learned, through painful experience, that the appropriate response to Kang Min-jae's stillness was more stillness. The call, Min-jae said, encrypted. Our team has the signal. 48 hours for a full trace. Min-jae nodded once. Adrian Keller, pull everything. Financial history, travel patterns, communication networks. I want names. Every name connected to him that doesn't belong to the legitimate art world. You think he's operational. It wasn't quite a question. Min-jae answered it anyway. I think a man that precisely doesn't walk into a room Elena is in by accident. He looked at the screen for another moment. Then. And I think whoever sent him knows exactly what she means to this network. He did not say what she meant to me. He never said things like that. Not even in rooms where no one was recording. The 48 hours produced more than names. It produced a map, syndicate connections running 3 layers deep, money moving through Adrian Keller's art investment infrastructure, like water through cracked stone. A European origin point, transit nodes across Southeast Asia, and at the center of it, a name Min-jae recognized, Victor Hale, an architect of psychological warfare who had spent the better part of a decade dismantling rival criminal empires, not through violence, but through the people those empires loved. Min-jae sat with this information for a long time. He did not confront Elena. He did not have Adrian removed. He did not accelerate, not yet, because the network Keller was connected to was watching for exactly that kind of reaction, and a reaction was the only thing they didn't already have from him. He watched. He mapped. He eliminated threats, 3 steps ahead of her, without her ever knowing a threat had formed. And every night he came to bed in the dark, and Elena lay on her side facing the window. And the distance between them was precisely the width of everything he could not say in a language she could hear. She filed the papers on a morning in March. She had made the decision weeks before. She understood that now, looking back. The filing was just the formalization of something that had already completed itself inside her. She had spent 3 years feeling like a beautiful, well-maintained room that no one actually lived in. She had spent 3 years asking for warmth and receiving security instead, asking for presence and receiving protection instead, asking for love and receiving. She had convinced herself. Nothing. She sat across from him in the glass study. The city sprawled behind him through the window. He read the papers the way he read everything, completely, without visible reaction, missing nothing. Then he set them down. I won't sign. She felt the old fury rise in her chest, like something she had been storing in a place she'd forgotten about. You don't get to decide this for me. I'm not deciding anything for you. His voice was even. I'm telling you my position. Your position. She laughed, and it came out sharp and exhausted. 3 years, Minjai. 3 years, and I still don't know what your position on anything actually is. I don't know if you feel anything. I don't know if this, she gestured between them, meant anything to you beyond convenience. He looked at her. That look, direct, unhurried, calibrated. She had never been able to read it, and she had stopped trying. Sign the papers, she said. He didn't. She picked up the pen and signed her own name in the space that waited for it. Her hand was steady. She had made sure of that. She stood, and she did not look at the wedding ring on his gloved hand. And she walked out of that room with her spine straight, and her jaw set, and her heart doing something complicated inside her chest that she refused to examine until she was somewhere he couldn't see her do it. She told herself she had finally escaped. She almost believed it by the time the car reached the airport. The apartment was in a quiet district she had chosen specifically because it had no connection to Min Jai's world. 7th floor. Modest by any standard she had lived by for the last 3 years, but clean and hers, and, for the first week, something close to peaceful. The second week, her primary account froze. She called the bank. There was no explanation available at the branch level. An investigation had been opened. Funds were temporarily inaccessible. She was told to allow 5 to 7 business days. She allowed them. Nothing changed. She called again. A different representative. The same language. The same pathology. The same absence of resolution. She transferred money from a secondary account. That one locked 3 days later. She stood in her kitchen on a Tuesday morning with a phone pressed to her ear and a bank representative explaining, very politely, that they were unable to provide further information at this time, and she felt the first real cold thread of something that was not frustration but fear. She called Adrian. The number rang and rang and rang. She tried the second number, the one he had given her as a backup, the one he had said was always on. It rang. No answers, no voicemail, just ringing. And then silence, and then the small automated voice, telling her the call could not be completed. She sat on the edge of her bed. She tried again the next morning, and the morning after that. She sent messages to addresses she had memorized, because writing them down had felt too dangerous. Nothing came back. Not silence with warmth behind it, not even a cold acknowledgement. Just nothing, as though the person had been constructed specifically for a period of time, and that period had now concluded. By the 3rd week, she noticed the car, dark, parked on the street directly across from her building's entrance. It was never the same car twice, but it was always the same position, always the same distance, always the same quality of attention coming from behind tinted glass that felt deliberate rather than coincidental. She began varying her routes. The surveillance varied with her. She started coming home through the building's service entrance. One morning, she looked up and saw a man on the rooftop of the building to her left who did not appear to be doing anything a person with a legitimate reason to be on a rooftop would do. She locked her apartment door and stood against it and tried to breathe steadily. This was not Minjae's people. She understood this with a certainty she could fully articulate. It was in the quality of the attention, something rawer and less professional than what she had grown accustomed to inside this compound. Minjae's security was invisible by design. This was something that wanted to be seen. Something that wanted her afraid before it moved. She was afraid. It happened on a Thursday night. She had been careful. She had varied everything. Timing, route, entrance point. None of it mattered in the way she had hoped it would, because the people watching her had been watching long enough to map every variation as thoroughly as she had constructed it. She came through the side street adjacent to her building at 9:20. She heard them before she saw them. Not because they were loud, but because the street was wrong in a way her body registered before her mind caught up. Too quiet in the wrong places. A van she didn't recognize parked at an angle that blocked the natural sightline from the building's security camera. 3 men. Fast and practiced and completely silent. She opened her mouth and the sound she made didn't carry far before a hand covered it, and the street tilted, and she understood with sudden, clarifying terror that this was not a warning. This was a collection. Then the air cracked open. Gunfire. Controlled, rapid, surgical. Not random. Someone had been positioned, waiting, already knowing this was coming before it came. She felt herself dropped rather than released. The men around her pivoting towards something else entirely. And then there was shouting in Korean and the sound of a body hitting pavement, and then 2 more in quick succession, and then hands on her that were different. Firm but not rough, pulling her upright with a grip that communicated protection rather than capture. She lost consciousness somewhere between the street and the vehicle. She woke up in a room she recognized before she was fully awake. The ceiling, the quality of the air, the specific weight of the silence. She was back. She was back, and her body understood it before her mind had finished assembling this formation. And she was sitting upright and screaming before she had a thought clear enough to stop herself. I can't be here again. I just want to leave this cage. You made that decision. The voice came from the shadows near the window. She knew it with the whole of her nervous system before her eyes found him. Min-jae stood in the dark, still and unreadable, exactly as he had always stood in every room he occupied. Like the room had arranged itself around him rather than the other way around. He looked at her with that expression that gave away nothing and somehow, infuriatingly, communicated everything. And I can't just let you go. He told her the truth the next morning. Not because she demanded it. She did, but that wasn't why. He told her because the architecture of the situation had shifted in a way that made concealment functionally dangerous rather than protective. He sat across from her at the table in the war room. A room she had never been permitted to enter. A room full of screens and encrypted terminals, and the organized evidence of a war she had been living inside without knowing it. And he told her, Adrian Keller, syndicate asset, deployed specifically to access her emotional proximity to Min-jae's network. Victor Hale's operation, patient, precise, designed to find the fracture point in Min-jae's empire and apply exactly the right pressure to it. Elena had not been a victim of circumstance. She had been a target of a strategy that had been running for nearly 2 years before she had walked into that gala. She sat very still while he said this. You knew, she said, about Adrian. Within 3 weeks of the gala, the number landed in her chest like something physical. 3 weeks. Months of meetings, of burner phones, of the particular warmth she had mistaken for genuine human feeling. And he had known within 3 weeks. And you didn't tell me. Confronting you would have alerted his network. I needed to map the full structure before I moved. You watched me. Her voice was very quiet. You watched me and said nothing. I eliminated 6 separate threats against your life during that period, he said. None of which you knew were coming, because you weren't supposed to know. The silence in the room was different from the penthouse silence. This one had weight, evidence. She looked at the screens. At the footage, the financial maps, the network diagrams with Adrian Keller's name threaded through them like a nerve. The divorce, she said. You still didn't sign. The divorce was your choice. That didn't change my obligations. Obligations, she repeated. You are connected to my world, Elena. You became a target the day you married me. That doesn't end with paperwork. She wanted to be angry at this. She examined the anger and found something more complicated underneath it. Something that was only beginning to take shape. Something she didn't have clean language for yet. They found Adrian through the intel he had left behind. Fragments and intercepted communications. Location data his own network had not fully scrubbed. Elena was part of it, which was not Min-jae's first choice, and which he made his position on extremely clear. But she understood the networks in ways his people didn't. Understood the emotional architecture of how Adrian had operated, and that understanding became a kind of map. She worked in the war room alongside Sumin for 4 days. She was precise. She was focused. She did not sleep enough, and she drank too much coffee, and she did not think too long about the fact that she was dismantling the infrastructure of a man she had once believed loved her, because thinking about it too long made her feel things she couldn't afford in a room that required clarity. Adrian's information led them to 3 network nodes. 2 were legitimate. The third was a trap. She knew it was a trap at the moment she was supposed to walk through it. Too late, the way these things always were. The location was wrong in the same way the street had been wrong on Thursday night. She made a call. Min Jae was already moving. She heard his voice through the radio communication before she saw him. Get her out, now. That location is compromised. And then the night came apart in all directions at once. She was pulled back. She heard the firefight from inside the vehicle, muffled and terrible and ongoing for longer than it should have been. When it stopped, she was already out of the vehicle and running before anyone could stop her. She found him in the corridor of a building she didn't know the name of, leaning against the wall with Soo-min beside him, and his hand pressed against his side. Dark suit darker on the left where it shouldn't have been. He looked up at her approach with that same expression, controlled, calibrated. I'm fine, he said. You are not fine. Her voice broke on the last word, and she didn't try to recover it. She reached him, and her hands went to his face without her deciding to put them there. And she was crying in the open in a way she hadn't done in front of him in 3 years, and she didn't stop. I'm sorry, Min Jae. I didn't understand what I was walking into. I didn't know what you were carrying, I thought. Alina, I thought you didn't love me. The words came out stripped of everything except their truth. I thought all of it was just control. I thought I was furniture in your life. And I was wrong, I was so wrong. And I am sorry that my decisions put you here. Stop apologizing, he said. His voice was quieter than usual. Something in it was different. Not the calibrated evenness she had memorized, but something underneath that. Something that had less armor on it. I can't, she said. You almost died. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, in the same quiet voice, there is no version of events in which I let anything happen to you. The city burns first. She understood, finally, what that meant. Not as possession, not as control. As the only language he had ever known for the thing that lived in him that she had spent 3 years calling absence. She pressed her forehead against his. He let her. He was in the hospital for 11 days. She was there for all of them. They did not have the conversation all at once. It came in pieces. A sentence here. A silence that meant something different than before. A question she asked and an answer he gave that was shorter than complete and longer than nothing. It was not reconciliation as she had imagined it in her life before him. It was something more true than that, which meant it was also harder and slower and worth every difficult minute of it. Victor Hale's network was dismantled through the winter. Adrian Keller was collected, eventually from a location in Eastern Europe that his own syndicate had stopped protecting once he became more liability than asset. He confirmed what Min Jae had already mapped. He filled in the edges. He was not, in the end, anything more than what he had always been. A tool that had been used and discarded, and then found again when the people who had discarded him ran out of options. Min Jae began the transition slowly, methodically, the way he did everything. Shipping routes converted to licensed logistics. Financial infrastructure moved through legitimate channels. It was not a clean process, and it was not a fast one. And there were people in his network who did not survive the transition in various ways. He did not pretend otherwise. Elena did not pretend she was comfortable with all of it, but she stopped pretending that a man who had spent 3 years quietly burning threats to the ground before they reached her door had never loved her. She understood now what his language looked like. She understood that learning to speak it back to him and teaching him to reach toward hers was not the end of a story. It was the beginning of one that was harder and more honest than the one they had been living inside. She moved back into the penthouse in April. Not because he asked her to, because she chose to, which was different, and which, for the first time in the history of their marriage, he understood was different. He was standing at the window when she arrived. Same position she had stood in 1,000 times. Bare floor, city below, the silence that had always had texture. He turned when he heard her. He did not say anything for a moment. Then, "You're back." "I'm back," she said. And this time, the silence between them held something neither of them had to translate.